At Grandma's wake, Mom hissed, "Don't pretend you cared," then watched the nurse thank me for paying every bill. Her breath was hot and sour with cheap wine as she leaned in, fingers digging into my arm hard enough that I knew I'd have bruises tomorrow. We were standing beside the casket, that weird gap between the end of the viewing line and the coffee urns where no one knows what to do with their hands. I was staring at Grandma's face, all powdered and waxy, when Mom's words landed like a slap. I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, someone cleared their throat behind us. "Excuse me, are you Mia?" We both turned. It was Linda, one of the evening nurses from the care home. I recognized her immediately. Graying bun, purple-rimmed glasses, the same calm expression she'd worn when Grandma couldn't stop crying that time last winter. She was holding a little white envelope with my name on it in shaky cursive. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, and her eyes were actually wet, which did something weird to my throat. She squeezed my hand. "I just wanted to thank you, personally. We don't see families step up the way you did very often. Covering all those outstanding bills, making sure she had her physio, the extra pain meds, the new mattress." She shook her head, smiling sadly. "You made her last year so much more comfortable. She talked about you all the time." Mom's grip loosened. I felt it, felt her fingers go slack on my arm. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost comical. If anything about that moment had been funny. I managed a hoarse, "Thank you," because my brain had short-circuited. My heart was doing that weird double-speed thing, but my body felt heavy, like someone had swapped my bones for wet sand. Behind me, I could feel Mom stiffen, like she was preparing to dive into a pool she hadn't realized was ice cold. Linda went on, oblivious. "The admin office wanted to send you a formal letter," she said. "But I told them I'd see you here. You probably saved us from having to discharge her to a cheaper facility, you know that? Anyway," she patted my hand again, turned to Mom with the generic funeral home sympathy face. "And thank you for everything too, Mrs. Collins." Mom blinked like someone had flashed a light in her eyes. Of course," she stammered. When Linda walked away, Mom turned back to me. The look on her face was, I don't know, like someone had just told her the ending of a movie she thought she'd already seen 10 times. Confusion, anger, and something that almost looked like fear. "What bills?" she whispered. And that's when it hit me that the story she'd been telling herself, and everyone else, about who cared most about Grandma did not include me wiring half my savings into a care home account at 2 a.m. I'm 31F. My mom is 59F, and Grandma was 82 when she died 2 weeks ago. This is in that weird space of grief where you're still catching yourself picking up the phone to call them, but you've also had just enough time to replay every conversation you didn't have. To understand why my mom thought she had the right to hiss "Don't pretend you cared" at her own daughter at a wake, you have to understand how our family works. Or doesn't. Mom is the eldest of 3. Grandma had her at 19. Then an uncle, then an aunt, both of whom live interstate and only swooped in for Christmas photos and the occasional guilt-laden phone call. Mom likes to tell everyone she raised herself, which is not entirely fair but also not entirely wrong. Grandpa left when she was 10. Grandma worked 2 jobs and drank too much and didn't always show up to school concerts. By the time I came along, Grandma had sobered up and settled down, mostly. She worked part-time at a library and lived in a tiny duplex full of old books and crocheted blankets. To me, she was warm hands, soft mints, and the smell of Pond's cold cream. To my mom, she was a lifetime of unresolved resentment in a cardigan. "Don't let her guilt trip you," Mom would say when I was little and excited about going to Grandma's. She had her chance to be a good mother. Meanwhile, Grandma would slip me a $5 note and whisper, "Don't tell your mother I spoiled you. She'll skin me alive." With a wink. So yeah, lots of love. Lots of landmines. Things really went sideways about 3 years ago. Grandma had a fall at home, fractured her hip, and everything unraveled in that slow, terrifying way big things do. One minute she was complaining about those stupid kids on the bus. The next she was forgetting her PIN and leaving the stove on. Hospital, rehab, then the big discussion about long-term care. By then, Mom was the one with power of attorney. She liked being able to say, "I'm in charge," without the actual responsibility part. Her first suggestion was, "We'll just move her in with us," which sounded lovely in theory and like a disaster in practice, given my parents' two-bedroom house and my dad's night shifts. I live about 40 minutes away with my partner, Sam. We both work full-time. We don't have kids yet, but we have jobs that eat our brains and a one-bedroom flat that barely contains our furniture, let alone another human being and a walker. "I can't do full-time care," I said in that hospital room that smelled like bleach and boiled vegetables. "Not without quitting my job." Mom rolled her eyes. "God forbid your career is interrupted," she snapped. Grandma, in the bed, looked up at us with this tired little smile. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, which is the sentence tattooed into the DNA of every woman in my family. So we toured a few facilities. I went to 5. Mom went to 2 and complained about the parking at both. We ended up choosing a mid-range place 20 minutes from Mom's house. Not the cheapest, not the fanciest. It had a little garden, a decent activities calendar, and the staff actually looked people in the eye. The first bill came a month later. I was at my desk, halfway through replying to an email about a client throwing a tantrum over fonts, when my phone rang. "Do you know what this place costs?" Mom snapped before I could say hello. "They're charging her extra for physio and incontinence products. And Mia. Healthcare isn't free," I said, already feeling my stomach sink. "Do we know what she actually has in savings?" "We?" she snorted. "Excuse me, I've been managing her money for years. I know exactly what she has, and it's not enough for this nonsense." We danced around it for a while. Eventually it came out that Grandma's savings had been drip-fed into helping pay Mom's mortgage, bail my uncle out of a gambling debt a few years back, and a dozen other little financial emergencies that weren't emergencies at all, just poor planning. "It was her idea," Mom said defensively when I pointed this out. "She wanted to help. That's what family does." "What family does," I said through gritted teeth, "is make sure the person who helped them doesn't end up broke in a care home." She hung up on me. I stewed on it for a week. I tried talking to my uncle, who said, "Your mother's always been dramatic. I'm sure it'll be fine." I tried talking to Grandma, who just patted my hand and said, "Don't worry, dear. If it gets too expensive, your mother will just sneak me out." I've always wanted to be a fugitive. The facility started sending reminders. "Outstanding balance. Second notice. We may have to reassess services." One afternoon, I answered a call from their billing department and listened to a woman explain, in that careful professional tone, that if we couldn't keep up, they might have to move Grandma to a shared room or cut down on some of her extras. "What do you mean, extras?" I asked. "Well," she said, "the pressure relief mattress, for one, and the additional physio sessions. Those aren't strictly mandatory, except I'd seen how much better Grandma was with them. The regular physio meant she could transfer herself from bed to chair with only minimal help on good days. The mattress meant she wasn't covered in angry red patches anymore. Taking them away felt like, I don't know, like kicking the legs out from under her. That night, I sat at our kitchen table with a stack of printed invoices and my laptop open to my bank account. My chest felt tight and hot, the way it does right before you burst into tears or throw up. Sam sat next to me, one hand on my knee. "We can't afford to take on her entire care," I said. "It's like another rent. We also can't afford to let her lie in a crappy bed because your mom fucked up," Sam said, not unkindly. I laughed, this painful little sound. When did we become the adults? I still feel like I'm 15 and someone's about to tell me to unload the dishwasher. Sam squeezed my knee. "What if we cover the backlog first?" he suggested. "Get her out of the danger zone. Then talk to the facility about a payment plan. Maybe your mom will pull her head out of her ass when she realizes someone else is paying. She'll just feel relieved," I said. "And then she'll never think about it again." "You can't control how she reacts," he said. "You can only control what you're okay living with." So I paid it. It felt surreal, wiring that much money. Money I'd quietly saved over years for a future house deposit. for maybe a baby one day, into an account with a reference code that said, outstanding balance 2764. I told myself it was a loan to the universe. I told myself not to think about it too hard. I didn't tell my mom, not out of pettiness, but because I knew exactly how that conversation would go. You think I'm a bad daughter. You think you know better. I was going to pay it. I just hadn't got around to it. Stop throwing your money around to make me look bad. Instead, I set up a smaller automatic payment each month to chip away at future costs. I quietly told the billing lady to put my number down as a secondary point of contact. I got to know some of the staff by name, Linda especially. She was the one who always had time to explain how Grandma was doing beyond fine. I visited when I could, once a week most weeks, sometimes more, sometimes less if work exploded. Mom would drop by on weekends and complain about the food, the parking, the fact that Grandma didn't seem grateful enough. She just sits there, Mom would say. You'd think after everything I've done she'd say thank you once in a while. You're not doing it for a thank you, I said once before I could stop myself. She turned on me so fast my head spun. You have no idea what I'm doing, she snapped. You swan in for an hour with your fancy coffees and think you're Florence Nightingale. There was always this narrative with Mom. She was the long-suffering martyr. I was the selfish one. No amount of reality seemed to shift it. About 6 months before Grandma died, things got worse. She started having more falls, more infections. She'd cry for no reason, ask for people who'd been dead for years. One night, at 11:30 p.m., my phone rang. Hi Mia, it's Linda, she said. Your grandma's okay, but she's been very agitated. We had to adjust her medication. I just thought you might want to know. Did you call my mom? I asked, already pulling on jeans over my pajama bottoms. I tried, she said. No answer. Of course not. Mom doesn't answer unknown numbers after 9 p.m. because it's always bad news. I'll be there in 20, I said. Sam drove. The roads were empty and wet, the wipers making that rhythmic squeak. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. When we got there, Grandma was half asleep, clutching a tissue in her hand. The TV was playing some late-night quiz show no one was watching. Linda explained the new meds, the risks, what to expect. She talked to me like I was the default responsible adult. And part of me glowed with that and part of me wanted to scream, this should be my mother. Thank you for coming, Linda said as we left. A lot of families don't. On the drive home, Sam said, you know, if this were a story on Reddit, everyone in the comments would be telling you to go low contact with your mom. I laughed tiredly. It's not so easy when it's real life, I said. And it wasn't, because for every awful thing my mom said, there was also the fact that she still brought Grandma her favorite biscuits sometimes. She still booked her hair appointments. She'd still sat in waiting rooms for hours during the early hospital days. People aren't all one thing. I think that's what makes this so hard to untangle. Fast forward to the week Grandma actually died. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was in a staff meeting when my phone lit up with the facilities number. I stepped out, answered, and heard the words, passed peacefully, and, I'm so sorry. I drove to Mom's house instead of straight to the care home because I was half worried she didn't know yet. She did. The nurse had called her first. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she hadn't touched, staring at the wall. When she saw me, she burst into tears and said, she's gone. Over and over like it was the only sentence left. In that moment I didn't hate her. I just held her and cried too. The wake was 3 days later. My uncles flew in for once. Cousins I hadn't seen in years materialized from suburbia. There was an open casket viewing because Grandma had once said she wanted people to see she was really, truly gone and not off gallivanting. The funeral home smelled like lilies and cold meat. Mom spent the morning directing people like she was running a show. Put those flowers over there. No, not that photo, I look terrible in that one. Someone tell the priest not to mention the drinking. She hadn't slept. You could see it in the red rims of her eyes and the way her lipstick feathered into the lines around her mouth. I stayed mostly in the background, greeting people, accepting hugs from old neighbors. A couple of Grandma's friends from the library came and told me stories about her sneaking romance novels into the serious literature section. I half laughed, half cried. At some point, Mom caught me standing near the casket, wiping my eyes. She swooped in, heels clicking angrily. "Oh, here we go," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Don't pretend you cared. You barely visited at the end." That's what she was talking about, by the way. The last month, when Grandma was really bad, I'd only managed 2 visits because of work deadlines and a flu that took me down for a week. Mom decided those 2 weeks canceled out 3 years of everything else. Something in me snapped then, a thin little wire that had been holding up a lot of weight. I turned to her, ready? Actually ready? For once to say something like, "Are you kidding me?" I didn't get the chance, because that's when Linda appeared with the envelope and detonated the entire narrative. After she walked away, Mom's first reaction wasn't gratitude. I had no idea, thank you. It was suspicion. "What bills?" she asked, still whispering like the corpse might report her. I swallowed. "The back payments," I said. "The physio, the mattress, some of the extra care hours." Her eyes narrowed. "Why would there be back payments?" I stared at her. "Because you didn't pay them." "I was going to," she hissed. "They kept messing up the invoices, sending them to the wrong email. I told them I'd sort it out." "They sent them to the email you never check," I said. After the third final notice, I got tired of waking up at 3 a.m. imagining them moving her to a shared room because of a clerical error and your pride. "You had no right," she snapped. "That's my mother. I'm the one in charge. You went around me to make yourself look like the hero." I actually laughed, this short, ugly sound. A couple of people turned to look. "Yeah, that's exactly why I emptied my savings at 1 in the morning," I said. "So a nurse I don't know could thank me at a wake 3 years later." That was definitely the endgame. Her face flushed, 2 angry red spots blooming on her cheeks. "Don't be sarcastic," she said. "You know how this makes me look? Like I couldn't take care of my own mother." I felt so tired I could have curled up in one of the pews and slept for a week. "This isn't about how you look," I said quietly. "It's about how she lived. And she lived better because I could afford to help. That's it." Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have a comeback. Someone called her name from across the room, and she straightened her shoulders like pulling on a coat. "We'll talk about this later," she said, in that tone that used to make me shrink when I was a kid. "Maybe," I replied, "if I feel like being yelled at about doing the right thing." After the wake, there was that awkward gathering at our house. Sandwiches, casseroles, people balancing paper plates on their knees. Mom floated around, receiving condolences. She barely looked at me. Later that night, when most people had gone and the house smelled like wilting flowers and dishwashing liquid, she cornered me in the hallway. "You made me look incompetent," she said without preamble. "I didn't make you look anything," I said. "Reality did that. I just didn't hide it from people." "You knew how much I've been doing," she said. "Driving there, organizing doctors, dealing with her moods. And you swoop in with your credit card and now everyone thinks you're Saint Mia." I stared at her, stunned. "Do you hear yourself?" She crossed her arms. "Well, did you enjoy it? Being the favorite for once? Having the nurses fawn over you?" "I enjoyed that Grandma had a decent mattress," I said. "I enjoyed that she could move without crying. That's it." "She was my mother," she repeated, as if that ended the discussion. "And she was my grandmother," I said. "And your negligence was hurting her." Her hand flew to her mouth like I'd slapped her. "How dare you?" she whispered. Sam appeared in the doorway then, probably having heard the last bit. "Everything okay?" he asked carefully. "No," Mom snapped. "But your girlfriend seems to think she's perfect, so who am I to argue?" I felt something inside me settle then. Maybe it was that wire giving up completely, maybe it was something else. I just knew I was done. "I'm not perfect," I said. I'm just not willing to pretend I didn't care because it makes you feel better about the parts you got wrong. She stared at me, eyes shiny. For a wild second, I thought she might say, I'm sorry. Instead, she said, you've always thought you were better than me, and pushed past us down the hall. So now I'm here, 2 weeks later, typing this out on a throwaway because I don't actually know what to do with all of this. I miss my grandmother. I miss the way she'd say, oh, it's you, when she heard my voice on the phone, like that was the best possible outcome of any ringing. I miss her smell, her fussing about whether I was eating enough. I do not miss the dynamic with my mother. I don't know what our relationship is now. We've texted a couple of times about practical things, estate paperwork, sorting through grandma's stuff, but it's brittle and transactional. She still hasn't acknowledged what Linda said at the wake, or what I did, except to complain about how it made her look. Part of me feels like utter crap, like maybe I should have told her sooner, involved her more, forced the issue instead of quietly taking on the bills. Part of me wonders if I let my resentment drive the secrecy. Another part of me knows that every time I've tried to bring up hard things with her, she's turned it into an attack and I've ended up apologizing. I didn't pay those bills to score points. I paid them because the idea of my grandmother lying in a terrible bed because my mother couldn't face her own financial mess made me feel physically sick. I'd do it again, even knowing it would lead to that scene at the wake. I guess I'm just stuck between grief and anger. Grieving the woman we buried, grieving the relationship with my mom I thought we might eventually have, angry that even in death she's still keeping score. When Mom hissed, "Don't pretend you cared," something in me wanted to scream, I have the bank statements to prove it. I didn't. Linda did that for me without meaning to. And standing there, with my mother's fingers bruising my arm and the nurse thanking me in front of everyone, I realized something I can't unrealize. My mother and I have been living in two different versions of reality. In hers, she's the only one who ever really shows up, and I'm the selfish daughter who flits in for appearances. In mine, I've been quietly holding up beams she doesn't even see, and she still calls me selfish when I'm too tired to hold one more. I don't know where we go from here. Maybe we try therapy, if she'll ever agree to it, unlikely. Maybe we drift. Maybe we have a huge, ugly fight one day that clears the air. What I do know is this. The next time someone tries to tell me what I did or didn't feel for a person I loved, I have permission, from myself if no one else, to say, you don't get to decide that. Cared. Enough to visit, enough to call, enough to argue, enough to pay. Enough to stand at a wake and not throw a scene when my mother tried to erase that. Enough to write this now, hoping that somewhere, between the lines, Grandma knows.